why don't we go to the man himself, talk a little baseball, former Major League Baseball player, writer. My God, Doug Glanville, I never have all of the titles by which to introduce you. How are you doing, sir? Thanks so much for giving us a few minutes today.
Doing well. Yeah, I appreciate. I try to wear as many hats as I can, and if not, I can put them on my feet. Even wear some shoes too.
Well, we enjoy all the hats that you wear and all the things that you do. And Jeff and I have been talking lately a lot. We're watching the NFL hiring process. We've been talking about the coaching carousel, and then we saw you come out with a piece this week on ESPN, sort of along the same lines, exploring why Major League Baseball needs more Black managers, but also why it won't be you right now. And we've always thought you're the perfect guest to join us for a good conversation about these challenging issues. Can you talk to a little bit about why you wrote the piece and what your thoughts are right now?
No, I appreciate that. It's something I've thought about for a while. That is the opportunity to be a major league manager. And in 2014, I did actually interview with the Tampa Bay Rays. Then Chaim Bloom was over there, who's now the Red Sox GM. And it's come up from time to time about the conversation around the lack of Black managers throughout the game. And what I wanted to turn on its head a little bit is the sense that, there's a lack of sort of talent out there, of sort of Black talent or Black candidates, or the sense that diversity equals a lesser quality, right? If you try to diversify, therefore you're not getting the best. And I wanted to pull that back a little bit and look at the fact that I have had inquiries over the years, not so much, be our manager, but definitely to get back in the game. And I was confronted with a choice as a father that of all these boxes that I check, which today are very much what make a manager, whether it's the Ivy League thing or all these other things, it's that, the family aspect, the box of diversity that I check that can be an asset to how the game is trying to evolve and embrace diversity more. But actually, for me, it was a burden. And it was a burden because I was weighing what my kids would face with me being gone and my family and how that would impact them, especially in the climate that we've been in recent years over sort of the racism and the openness by which it's been expressed and the uncertainty about even my own safety, let alone my children's safety. And so I wanted to share that story and thinking more as a parent going through this process of being considered a candidate. And, I wanted to express that it won't be me right now, given what we're up against in 2021. And I recognize there's a privilege in being able to make that choice, proactively, I guess you could say, make that choice, knowing that, there's quite a collision between these forces.
Doug, we've talked to you in the past about some of your own experiences, including the shoveling snow in the driveway, what's happened at the airport. How do you as a father, and when do you explain those situations to your own children, and how you address them and how you would like them to address them?
Well, I know that it's something I want to address as late as possible if given my choice. You just know there's an innocence that that children come into this world, open to so many ideas, and often as parents or society kind of can close that up and make you sort of provincial or however things can play out to divide or separate. And my kids, you mentioned the snow shoveling, they were still very young, but because it was something I was engaged in on a day-to-day basis for almost 18 months after that, it was hard not to just have more further conversations, whether it was neighbors coming over or their kids. And my kids were old enough at the time, 6-ish, 7-ish, to ask questions about, things that they were starting to hear more about, or whether they were brown in their color or something that seemed to be more physical descriptive, as opposed to how larger society may racialize things, especially traits that may be negative, criminalize, and so on. So I treaded lightly, but I knew that it was inevitably going to be part of their reality as brown children. And as it sort of came in their life more and more, I started to sort of share more of my life. And that's the tough part as a parent, because you're saying, well, I don't want to jade them. I don't want them to feel insecure. I don't want to jump the gun and assume that they're going to face all these horrible things and it may be a little different in their time versus mine and so on. But I also felt that if I didn't share these conversations, that I would leave them vulnerable to not know that, how our society can work and the sort of legacy and somewhat stain of racism and how it plays into their parents' life and in their lives. So I tried to walk in their shoes at the pace that they were experiencing things, but there was times it was just undeniable. And eventually, I had that incident at LAX where the cab driver refused to take me to my hotel and told me to take the bus and told me how much it cost and all this stuff. Multiple times refused, and ended up taking the next passenger was white. He picked him up and took him right away. And so when I started to take that on and talk to LA Council and the head of LAX and so on, it was a conversation I started to have more directly with my son in particular. And he made the conclusion, I wrote it in the article, saying it just seems like, every time something really bad happens to you, it's because of your color. That's sort of a little bit of a paraphrase, but that's effect what he said. And those are heartbreaking moments, but they're also teaching moments. And I definitely tried to take the opportunity to listen as much as I spoke.
We often talk about, in all our careers, make the decisions we have to make, family versus jobs. Unfortunately, we have to make a lot of those decisions. You talk a lot in the article about the decision that you decided to make for now, but that it had to be hard for you to make that decision, not just because it may have been your dream to manage a team or to run a team after your days as a ball player are over, but also because of the voice that you could lend that could help other people understand better. How hard of a struggle was it for you to decide that right now this is something, even if you wanted to do it, and even if you thought you could benefit other people by doing it, that now wasn't the time to do it?
It was a heavy struggle, and I think the struggle has a lot of layers to it. One is, as you mentioned, I have an opportunity to be that person to get in the game and represent my community of diversity and also help literally from the field forge a new direction. Talk to young players in the next generation, influence policy, and just by your presence alone, you can see that. You can say, hey, baseball is taking the steps. I would have been one of those managers to count and say, oh, now there's 3 black managers, right? That matters. And it also was difficult because it's a very similar walk throughout any time where you might be pioneering or entering a new arena where you're looked at through this identity lens. And within that lens, the questions you ask about can be deeper. You can say, well, I want to take this journey, but I know I have to be more than a manager, right? I'm blazing a trail, or I'm carrying something else. And that is to some degree the black experience universally. You feel like you're constantly representative. And there's times that that's a source of tremendous pride. There's times that that's heavy. That's heavy to carry because you're not able to, sort of walk your way on your own. You have to kind of represent all the time. And so one of the things I said, I did something for ESPN Daily. I think the line we kind of were talking through about expressing was, it's important to recognize that, okay, I can I can help the game benefit in terms of being more diverse. And although I don't want that to be superficial, I understand what it can mean. But I also think the real important lesson is understanding not only checking a box, but what it means to live in that box. And that's where the real education and the sustainable work can happen, because when you open up to what it means, like think of something that seems simple. All right, let's just say I get a job. I'm hired by the Minnesota Twins. I'm their next manager. I have to think long and hard what neighborhood I'm going to live in. That's just not simple. It's just not simple. I have to be concerned about if I'm jogging in this neighborhood, are people going to call the police? Are people going to, I don't know. These are things that happened to me all through my life. Buying a house has never been simple for me, even with a major league uniform on my back. So I think that's the opportunity and the struggle, because where my family and where we are and how old my kids are also what it could possibly mean. And then there's also the fact that I don't necessarily want to, I didn't have to go out there and say, hey, I'm not actively pursuing, because I still were, I was still getting calls. Those calls could stop because I'm, pronouncing something I didn't necessarily have to pronounce. But more and more questions were asked, like, well, Glanville would be a decent candidate, be a good candidate. And then, it was something that I was always hesitant about, even when I interviewed for the Rays job.
So you mentioned filling the box, but obviously the first thing, we have to get more people to check the box to get the job in terms of having more Black managers and front office personnel in baseball. They've had the C League rule. They've tried efforts in baseball. They've tried things in other sports. How do we get to the place we need to be where you're not depended on to check that box because they don't have enough other people that they're looking at?
Well, that's an important question. And, for starters, there's so many incredibly committed Black candidates out there. There are. And what's tough about baseball is, even with the C League rule, right, which mandated the interviewing of diverse candidates, and not just at the top level. It's actually been very successful on levels like, sort of, if you want to use the word, below the field level manager, the GM. It's done very well in administratively. However, it struggled at the top levels of management. And part of it is, if you think of Major League Baseball commissioner's office as creating the C League rule almost like a federal level, then the teams representing sort of the states, they say, well, hey, that's cool, that's the minimum standard, but we're going to do what we need to do for our team. And as a private enterprise, they might say, hey, I'm just going to hire who I want to hire. And when you don't have diversity in power, and people who are making decisions have relatively homogenous circles by which they're working in, whether it's where they live or who's around them or their friends or family, and the nepotism and all those other elements that play into limiting your reach, then it reinforces itself. Even if it's not out of something nefarious, it could just be like, hey, like Theo Epstein said, I just hired the people I was at Yale at, or whatever. They just kind of fell into that trap of comfort. And so until you diversify the power, it's really difficult, because it tends to reinforce itself. It tends to justify its existence. It tends to concentrate in its own circles. And so it's hard when they're feeling like, hey, I'm making this, quote, compromise to get diversity. You always end up cheapening it, because you're saying, well, I'll do this kind of favor, and not really fully behind it and saying this is actually a great choice for us. It's sharing the power of what diversity means, not just because you're coloring by numbers, but you really understand that it creates a diversity of thought. It creates a diversity of perspective. It creates a diversity of reaching different kinds of people. It creates a diversity of leadership approaches in how to reach people. Those are significant in the success of any institution, especially when your community is diverse. Baseball is a very diverse sport. So those are the challenges, but I would say power is a big part of that equation, and where the diversity lies. Because we've seen time and time again, from Al Campanis forward, that the word qualified, quote, and I use it in air quotes, and, quote, experience are highly subjective. They're highly subjective, and they're colored by their own biases, but yet they're used as a hammer at times to deny people opportunity, as if it's something sort of so clear and undeniable, when it actually has so much nuance.
So is one of the answers not just to look for managers and front office people, but isn't the answer to get more people that are of diverse backgrounds into ownership?
Absolutely. And that is probably a taller order with the resources that's required, the vetting process. But that would make a difference. That would make a significant difference. And of course, within that is just getting, continuing on the track where, if you don't have that diversity at the top, that you're able to have a certain being in tune with society at large, and the importance of having this diverse community of people that are not just in specific roles, but throughout. And that part, I think baseball is embracing fairly well. They are working hard at every rank to try to create diversity. In some ranks, they've had a lot of success with the ceiling rule because it doesn't just mandate interviewing diverse candidates at the top. It's everywhere. And that part has been fairly successful. But yes, is it harder to find, people with $700 million? Yes, absolutely. And then you get into the economic, legacy and challenge that tends to go along racial lines also. So there's a taller order there, but no question that they have to find ways to create that opportunity.
You talk about the barriers with ownership and with being managers. A player who broke a lot of barriers passed away today, Hank Aaron. We'd be remiss if we didn't give the opportunity to talk a little about him, the impact he had on the game, but also the role that he played in bringing about social change.
Hank Aaron was royalty, true royalty. And I say that with a lot of layers to it because I think he showed us so much about his excellence through his excellence on the field. This is one of the greatest players of all time. And on top of that, he came in at the end of the first decade of Jackie Robinson, who was close to retiring at that point. And he came in and immediately established that not only was this great experiment of Robinson something that was important, but it was that dominant players can come from this, exciting, game-changing players. And it happened quickly. And you think of people who did not have an opportunity to even get in the locker room were coming on and having that kind of impact. But Hank Aaron also understood that it was much more than numbers, that you can achieve greatness and be quantifiably impactful, but yet he knew that he had to continue fighting for equality, continue fighting for opportunity, and he did it till the day he died. He was constantly an ambassador to the game to try to create opportunity, to try to help people see the lack of representation and how hurtful that is to what can be such a beautifully woven tapestry of people in baseball. That was something he continued on despite reaching the top of the game. And that was something as a young player, me coming up, seeing how important it was that this mentorship existed, that it wasn't just get mine and get out. It was important to think about what you were leaving behind and not only where you came from. And Hank Aaron was all that embodied in one. And for that reason, he's not only a loss in seeing someone iconic, but just the fact that he was still actively pushing us to our better angels.
Doug, we always appreciate the thoughtfulness you bring to these conversations and the time you give us to have them. Thanks so much for joining us again, and keep writing and putting it out there so that people can have a better understanding, and hopefully keep joining us so that we can all talk about it and have a better understanding ourselves.
Absolutely. Really appreciate being on. And as I've always spoken, great. You always have a great show. So it's an honor to be part of it.
Thank you. You take care of yourself and have a great day. Thanks, Doug.
All right. You too. Bye-bye.